Southeastern Alaska, known as the Alaskan Panhandle, is a coastal region renowned for its pristine natural beauty and its unforgiving and rugged terrain. The region consists of a long stretch of mountain ranges, swathes of dense forest, and large islands etched from the mainland by deep fjords and swelling glacial rivers. Largely because of the harsh terrain, the infrastructure in many regions in the Alaskan Panhandle is limited, and the population is sparse, particularly in the more remote areas away from the major cities. Many of the region's population are industrial workers that harvest the area's bountiful natural resources. The logging, mining, fishing, and cannery industries are major staples of the Alaskan Panhandle's economy. Janice Welsh, born in 1904, was an Alaskan businesswoman who became renowned in the salmon canning industry after she took the role of the president of the Bellingham Canning Company, located in the town of Yakutat, following her husband's sudden passing. Janice was a bit of an anomaly in the canning industry, which was a heavily male-dominant industry. Upon becoming the president of the Bellingham Canning Company, she became the first and only woman operating a cannery business in Alaska. Despite the disadvantages of being the only woman in a male-dominant industry in the early 20th century, Janice Welsh quickly rose to become a well-respected figure within the canning industry. Employing mostly local native peoples, the Bellingham Canning Company found great success and offered high wages to its workers when compared to many of its competitors. The cannery was so successful, in fact, that in 1946, Welsh purchased a majority stake in the Icy Strait Salmon Company, located in Hoonah, Alaska, becoming the president of that company as well. On July 9, 1958, Janice Welsh and four of her close friends rowed their skiffs to Contoc Island, located not far from the Bellingham Cannery, to enjoy a picnic together and to gather some of the island's wild strawberries. After they had finished their picnic, two of the friends bid the remaining members of their small party farewell and began to row back to the mainland in their skiff. Suddenly, a massive earthquake rocked the bay, and the duo in the skiff recalled seeing Janice Welsh, Robert Tibbles, and his wife being hurtled into the air as the section of the island they were standing on collapsed into the depths of the bay below, with a massive surge of water quickly consuming the rest of the island. Janice Welsh and Mr. and Mrs. Tibbles were never seen again. Their deaths would become the first fatalities in a chain of events triggered by the tremor that would go on to claim several more lives later on that day. Approximately 160 miles to the south of Yakutat Bay lies Lituya Bay, a remote inlet carved by glacial runoffs from the massive glaciers looming above its steep eastern shores. Lituya Bay is quite deep, reaching a maximum depth of 720 feet. The entrance of the bay is also very narrow, and boats seeking the shelter of Lituya Bay's steeply sloped shores must navigate through with caution. Lituya Bay doesn't have any permanent residents, but it does offer mariners a place of respite along a long stretch of coast without any other sheltered inlets. On July 9, 1958, at around the same time the earthquake had claimed the life of Janice Welsh and Mr. and Mrs. Tibbles back in Yakutat, a group of 9 mountaineers had packed their gear and descended from the Lituya Glacier and into Lituya Bay. Unsuccessful in their bid to climb Mount Lituya, the group had arranged for a local pilot to come pick them up on July 10th, but to their surprise, he arrived early at around 8 p.m. on July 9th. With the pilot insisting that they depart before sundown, the group quickly packed their gear into the plane, and by 9 p.m., the group of mountaineers was headed back to civilization, leaving behind 3 small fishing boats that had settled into Lituya Bay for the night. The 3 fishing vessels, the Edry, the Sunmore, and the Badger, each had 2 people aboard. The Sunmore and Badger were crewed by 2 married couples, the Wagners and the Swansons, respectively. The Edry was crewed by a man named Howard Ulrich, along with his 7-year-old son. The Edry had elected to anchor the most inland of the 3 fishing vessels in a small cove in the southern part of the bay, while the Sunbeam was anchored closest to the narrow entrance, with the Badger nestled in the cove behind the Sunbeam. At 10:16 p.m., the sleepy sailors were rocked awake by tremors from the earthquake earlier that day, which had ruptured the Fairweather Fault, a portion of which runs directly below the eastern section of Lituya Bay. Upon reaching the decks of their vessels, about a minute after the earthquake had begun, The sailors heard the very loud and unmistakable sound of rushing water. They were quickly greeted by the sight of an indescribably huge wall of water forming in the distance towards the eastern shore, as huge quantities of rock and glacial ice tumbled into the water, and they leapt into action to escape the bay as quickly as possible. The Wagners on the Sunbeam, who were the closest to the entrance of the bay, quickly raised their anchor and began to make their way through the tight entrance of the bay, with the Swansons on the Badger following behind them. Meanwhile, on the Edgery, as Howard Ulrich attempted to raise his anchor, the chain became stuck, and he quickly realized that he would not be able to escape the rushing wall of water, so he let out his anchor chain all the way, started the engines, and gave his son a life jacket, and hoped for the best. Rushing at a high rate of speed, the several hundred-foot high wave quickly washed over Cenotaph Island in the middle of the bay and swept beneath the Edgery, snapping the anchor chain, which ricocheted into the hull of the boat, and the wave lifted the Edgery several hundred feet into the air and over its crest, where Howard Ulrich was able to regain control of his boat and steer his way through the frothing, debris-filled waters. The Swansons and the Badger realized that they wouldn't make it in time to the entrance of the bay before the gargantuan wave reached them, so they turned their boat back towards the wave. The wave swept the boat up into its now curling crest, and the Badger sat almost suspended in the air at the crest of the wave, as the Swansons gazed down from the stern of their boat at the treetops and at the spit of Lituya Bay, now a great distance below them, and as the force of the wave moved them towards the breaking edge of the far side of the wave, the boat was tossed from the crest of the wave and tumbled into the sea below. Mr. and Mrs. Swanson miraculously survived the fall and emerged from the wreckage of their boat together in their skiff, using a chair as a makeshift paddle since the skiff's paddles had been swept away by the wave. Unfortunately for the occupants aboard the Sunbeam, the Wagners, they did not share a similarly fortunate fate like the other two vessels. The wave had reached them just as they were finishing exiting Lituya Bay, and the several hundred-foot wave broke on top of them as it reached the mouth of the bay, washing them along with a massive surge of water and debris. No trace of either Mr. or Mrs. Wagner nor any remains of the Sunbeam were ever recovered. The Edgery maneuvered its way towards the entrance whilst avoiding huge chunks of glacial ice, logs from uprooted trees, and other debris in 20-foot swells, calling a mayday on his radio, and by 11 p.m., the Edgery had safely exited Lituya Bay. A nearby vessel responding to Howard's mayday call came across the Swansons in their skiff and brought them aboard to safety. By both survivors' accounts, the wave was no doubt massive, but it wouldn't be until the following day that the extent of just how large the wave actually was would be understood. Dan Miller, a local geologist, reached Lituya Bay on the morning of July 10th. From his plane, Miller quickly observed the muddy, debris-filled waters of the bay and noted the scarred hills surrounding the bay, with water trickling down the slopes that were now barren of the thick layer of trees that had once previously adorned them. Upon measuring the trim line, it was determined that the wave had reached a height of 1,720 feet, making it the largest wave ever recorded. For a sense of scale, that is taller than the roof of both of the original World Trade Centers. Since there was no footage or images of the wave itself, it's almost incomprehensible what a wave of that scale would look like. But just for fun, I whipped up a dramatized Photoshop clickbaity image as an extremely rough illustration of the enormity of such a wave. Take this image with a huge grain of salt, but hey, you get the idea. Anyways, this initial 1,720-foot wave crashed into the northeast shoulder of Lituya Bay and washed over its side, creating a diagonal wave that swept towards the southeast end of the bay before breaking over the spit at the entrance, creating the second highest trim line on the southeastern shore aside from the trim line on the northeast shoulder. The tremor had caused 40 million tons of rock to shear from the northeast slope, which in turn caused the toe of the glacier to shear off as well, which released a huge surge of water from beneath the glacier. The force of this water lifted the glacier, and with the surge of rushing water and less pressure from above, the earth below it crumbled, causing a simultaneous underwater landslide, further adding to the water displacement caused by the falling rocks and ice. It has since been determined that other megatsunamis have also taken place in Lituya Bay throughout history, but this wave was likely the most enormous of them all. To this very day, the scarring on the shores of Lituya Bay from the 1958 megatsunami is still very visually apparent. And while there was heavy infrastructure damage and property damage in Yakutat near the epicenter of the earthquake, miraculously, only the 5 people covered in this video were killed. If either area had been more populated, the damages and loss of life resulting from it surely would have been greater. Thank you all for watching.